Very dear friend and very dear family member, Annette Finestone. We will begin our time together by inviting select family members and friends to come and speak, and then we will pass the microphone to others who wish to speak and share as well. So to begin, we have Laura, Annette's daughter.
Thank you everybody so much for joining us here today to celebrate Mom. That computer right there is my cousin Bonnie. She's in Arizona, and she'll be joining us for the duration. Hi, Bonnie. And well, we have a lot of family here. So Michael, my nephew, and Abby, my niece, my cousins Larry, Ellen, and Vic, and well, you know, on with. And our extended family, my adopted brother Kevin Cahill, recent adoptee. But, I'm going to try to make it through this. We'll see. Annette was known as many things: friend, volunteer, activist, photographer, hotel owner, aunt, sister, grandmother, mother-in-law. But to us, she was Mom. One of my favorite things when I was younger was to share my mom, because somehow in our crazy life, she was the mother and the boss of us all, straightforward, protective, and fierce. We weren't a game-playing family, but one game that I do remember most was sitting at the Trailways bus station in the city, watching people's feet as they walked by, and trying to figure out their life stories. It invoked in me the same kind of lasting interest and curiosity about people that she had. She got up every morning until we left high school to make us breakfast and insisted on family dinner every night. We didn't get to watch our half hour of television, Lost in Space being my favorite, not that that's changed at all, until the dishes were washed, the kitchen cleaned, and the floor swept. The one exception to the half-hour rule on occasion was Friday afternoon NBC 4:30 movies, the three of us watching Betty Davis tearjerkers and running downstairs to set up for the arriving guests with tears streaming down our faces on commercial breaks. And she never missed a beat. I can only remember 2 times as kids that Lisa and I managed to pull the wool over her eyes. One was our years-long battle about me hating milk and refusing to drink it, and her insistence that I did. Lisa and I finally worked out a scheme from the time we were very young in our little kitchen for her to either drink the milk or for me to pour it down the sink while she was running cover. The other I won't go into except to say that it was an adventure in growing contraband as teenagers in the garden, which was right next to the pool where the guests hung out all day long. But never mind. For those of you who knew her well, you can only imagine how tough it could be to be her advocate. My nickname for her was Dr. No. Even when she was in the midst of a health crisis, she would start off with, "I'm fine." To the day she died, she stubbornly refused help, even eating her ice cream, saying that she would rather struggle and do it on her own. And of course getting mad at me because I was trying to help. One morning a few weeks ago, I walked into her room. Since she couldn't see, she would always ask who was there. That morning, in her sweet, welcoming voice, she said, "Who is it?" I said, "Hi, Mom, it's me." She said, "Who?" I said, "Your daughter, Laura." As I sat down on the sofa, she took my hand and said, "Do I know you?" "I don't think we've met, but I'm so looking forward to getting to know all about you." On the one hand, I was saying, "Wow, really? Finally." And on the other hand, I was going, "Oh boy." So I went up and I got Hope. And when we got back to the room 2 minutes later, Mom didn't miss a beat. She said, "I'm okay. I'm awake now. I know who I am. I know who you are. And I know where I am." And that was Annette. Funny, sweet, and tough as nails. She was as positive as she was strong-willed and had a deep interest and appreciation for everyone around her, except, of course, for that man in the White House. But I digress. She loved Woodland Pond with a passion and never stopped raving about it to the staff and how everyone should move in. So on behalf of Annette and the family, I would like to acknowledge the Woodland Pond community for your professionalism, your compassion, your expertise, and your love. We'd be here all day if I mentioned everyone's names, and I know them. So please know that each and every one of you is loved, appreciated, admired, and that you live in our hearts. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your dedication and your service, ladies. And to Mom's so many friends, what would she and we have done without you? You are, in my mind, the epitome of community. We never forgot. You never forgot her. You always called. You stopped by, brought food, stepped in when needed, and maintained and deepened your ties with her. Having a busy life never got in the way of loving and seeing your friend. So just to signal out a couple of you, primarily for questionable behavior, we'll start with Kevin Cahill. Let's just start with 100 bottles of bourbon at her 100th birthday. There was one left when she died, by the way. And that time that you snuck the bourbon into the hospital, hidden in, gotta find the page, sorry, hidden in a basket filled with flowers and stuffed animals. She never stopped talking about that one either. And also to Reenie and Marge, whom I refer to as Mom's Pushers, who brought in on a regular basis contraband of hot dogs and chocolate shakes. And I'd also like to pay a special thank you to Jack Levy, who on a whim came to see Mom and was the one to hold her hand as she finally let go. Jack toasted Mom with me with what was left of her bourbon, and we saved some for her. And we waited. Mom and I had a running joke for several years, and that was the one day that she would wake up dead. It didn't quite happen that way, but close enough. So, since no matter what was going on, she was fine, we decided that her non-existent tombstone, we would say that she was a fine stone. And she was. She was one of a kind, a gem. And just to close, Jack contributed this poem, which I really find so poignant. It's written by William Penn in 1693, and it's so relevant to this situation anyhow. And this is the comfort of the good, that the grave cannot hold them, and that they live as soon as they die. For death is no more than a turning of us over from time to eternity. Death, then, being the way and condition of life, we cannot love to live if we cannot bear to die. They that love beyond the world cannot be separated by it. Death cannot kill what never dies, nor can spirits ever be divided that love and live in the same divine principle, the root and the record of their friendship. If absence be not death, neither is theirs.
David, Annette's son-in-law.
Hi, everybody. So here we are. Never thought we'd see this day. But I want to get one thing straight right off the top, and this will be obvious and apparent to many of you already, but Annette Finestone was one hell of a very, very special woman. And I used to work in television and did documentaries and programs, and I had the opportunity to really meet and hang out with some very famous and accomplished people. Jane Fonda, James Taylor, Bill Clinton, Oprah. And I can tell you in all honesty, without any exaggeration, I have never met anybody quite like Annette Finestone. She was, to me, larger than life. Anyway, she also happened to be my mother-in-law, so talk about luck. I mean, I love my wife Lisa. I'm so happy to meet her and marry her, but 40 years ago I did not realize I had actually won the incredible mother-in-law lottery. And and that was just the best that you could ask for. And so what was it about her that was so special? There's so many things you could mention. Certainly her joie de vivre, zest for life. She just wanted to do everything. She didn't want to miss anything. She was an incredibly social person, the opposite of a loner. She just wanted people around her all the time, and did have people around her all the time. It was hard to be with her alone because there was just always people there. So she was fiercely dedicated to her family and her friends, and had a lot of them. So you could mention Chates, that with Max, her husband of 58 years, had started really and built this classic mom and pop resort over the hill here in Accord. It was just so treasured by so many people and was sort of a life-defining experience for many of the young people who worked there. You can't imagine, those of you who knew that era, can't imagine Chates without Max, certainly, but you certainly could not imagine it without Annette. They were it. You could think about her political activism for decades, always on the right side of history, her great sense of adventure and travel. At 29 years old, going to live in Japan immediately after the war and compiling a remarkable photographic record of life during that time. Or many years later, at age 72, being the oldest woman on the Women's Convoy for Peace, this crazy journey, driving 22 trucks and cars and ambulance and a bus filled with medical and educational supplies all the way down to Nicaragua. But that was her. So these are all things I think that did make her special, but there's sort of things that she did. For me, the thing that really stood out and really made her unique was essentially the essence of who she was and how she was as a person. To be around Annette was to just be sort of bathed in this spirit that she had. She had a magnetic personality that was just warm and drew people to her. I can't tell you how many times I would be with her and come across, have an interaction with a complete stranger. And I never could figure it out. Was it the look in her eye, the turn of her head, the sarcastic remarks she would make? But inevitably, within 30 seconds, you could see this person, their reaction or the look on their face, she just had them. They were just captivated by this very special woman. So to me, this was the thing that really set her apart. It was also the attribute that allowed her to go up and get ready for a dinner party or to go out and come down a few minutes later. She could throw on anything and just, make it work with such elan. She had such a style. And, Laura mentioned Betty Davis. It's interesting because you'll see in the slideshow here, there's a couple of shots of Annette. Maybe some of you know the picture where she's, I think, recently returned from Japan. She's probably 30 years old. Probably at a party in Manhattan with a highball in her hand, one hand, a cigarette in the other, reclined in a gorgeous silk, suit. And I look at that picture and I say, my God, that's like Betty Davis. She's that glamorous. And in fact, if she was in the movie, she would have been the girl with pluck, sassy, intelligent, and fiercely curious and alive. That was Annette. So I don't mean to suggest that, Annette was, on some pedestal and all this. She was one of the most grounded people you'll ever meet. 2 feet on the ground, no nonsense. She was warm and open-hearted, but not touchy-feely. She could be quick to criticize. She was judgmental. She carried a lot of anger for many years. In the end, I think that, yeah, she could, heaven forbid, for instance, she did not suffer, as they say, fools gladly. She did not have the patience for it. And God forbid you were a congressional Republican. That was the end all. So I want to echo, what Laura said about Woodland Pond. I think it does deserve such a mention. She could not stop talking about how lucky she was to be here. And I think how many of us can say, who have had a full and exciting life like Annette did, and if we were to even live that long, but who among us could say that our happiest decade, really, in our life was our 90s? That was what Annette would say. And I think that's a large part a tribute to this community and the staff and certainly the friends and all the people that she's known. So the other person I'd like to mention, if he was here, is Paul Lurie, who I think, whose tender friendship at the very end of her life was just moving and very important to her. And isn't it interesting that here are 2 people who were born in 1917 and passed away within 2.5 weeks of each other, but really did not come across each other until the very, very end of their lives. And to me, they tell us 2 things. One, both of them were people that just had an incredible curiosity and zest for life. They, again, wanted to do everything and miss nothing. Is this the key to their longevity? Perhaps. But the other thing that really strikes me about it is that they show us that it is possible to find deep friendship, companionship, and even love, even after 100 years. So, thank you.
Lisa, Annette's daughter.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. My mother wanted this to be called her going away party, so I hope we all can be here in that spirit. She was ready to go, and she did not want us to mourn for her, which she said over and over, and that's hard, but I do want to take that to heart and trust that she meant it. She had a very full life, and it was time. It was over. I am going to read a poem by the late, great Mary Oliver, who died only just a few months before Annette did. It's called When Death Comes. When death comes, like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me, and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore, I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and I look upon time as no more than an idea. And I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy and as singular. And each name, a comfortable music in the mouth, tending as all music does towards silence. And each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular, real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. Thank you.
Evan Cahill.
Thank you very much. I'm in Woodland Pond, which means I have to start out with a couple of jokes. That's the Finestone rule. Sorry, I'm going to stick to it. The poem that Laura cited, 1693, was written by William Penn while Annette was in high school. I see my friend Roz Stark in the second row. I have a message from beyond for you, Roz. Annette says you're in charge of the Democratic Party now. And I am both sorry and relieved not to see Dorothy, because the last time we were here and Dorothy was in the room, I walked up to her without these glasses on, and I whispered something lewd and lascivious into her ear, and I looked up thinking I had just made another joke with Annette, only to see Annette all the way across the room.
And she still talks about that.
So my birthday greeting to Annette started out with an apology to Dorothy. So I didn't make that mistake today. Her daughters were here at the door, and while certainly Lisa and Annette have a striking similarity, and also Laura, there's no mistaking them for their mom. Laura called me yesterday and she asked me if I had prepared any remarks yet, and I said it hasn't come to me yet, but when it does, I'll write it down, because once it comes to me, that's it. It just comes through me. What came to me later on in the evening was something I wrote down that David just read to you without looking at my notes. There was an essence to Annette. This morning, Laura texted me and she said, you know, Kevin, this is Woodland Pond. Don't take too long. A lot of people want to speak, and some people might be dozing off. So I said, I have 5 minutes with some nap time in the middle. So with that, I'm going to get a little more serious, but not too serious. Don't worry about that. We all have a temporal physical existence. Our spirit, though, that can live on. There's something eternal in all of us. To the extent that we've made a mark, that we've influenced others, that we've created something, our essence can continue long after our bodies give out. Being a sibling, being a parent, gives us that opportunity. So does friendship. And that's who we represent here today. As her families and friends, we are the first vessels of Annette Finstone's eternal spirit. So let's each right now take a moment to recall something special about this infinitely extraordinary woman. You may know about her birth or her infancy and early days, her birth in New York City or her early days in Accord, or maybe later in childhood when she ventured back to the city to complete her first round of formal education there and in Wisconsin. You may have a memory of her as a young woman who raised money for the Spanish resistance. You might recall something from when she traveled back east from Wisconsin to be part of the first generation of women to truly be in every aspect of our workforce, and in her case, to put others to work. It's possible you'll think of Annette as the photographer in Japan, capturing the sometimes retching difficulties of a whole society trying to recover from unprecedented levels of the destruction of war. Or maybe it's the beginning of her partnership with Max. In the case of her early marriage, you would be forgiven if one of your sources is an FBI transcript of a secretly recorded Bedford Street kitchen table conversation. Perhaps the thought was of the woman who continued her family tradition of providing a safe and relaxing country inn for radicals, intellectuals, actors, poets, and musicians at a time in our history where the legacy of 1950s intolerance lingered. Or maybe it was Annette, the modern anti-war demonstrator who comes to mind, the one who not only protested but who intervened, bringing food and supplies directly to those caught in the middle in Central America. Then there's the returning student, honing her photography skills to capture and portray still another generation of life. Many of us in our minds might have gone directly to Annette Finestone as the host of wonderful parties that took place on the other side of the gunks out there in the beautiful home that she and Max created. Or maybe it's how she influenced this Woodland Pond community, a place she truly loved, forming life here in her own image of literature, social interaction, political activism, and of course, bourbon. Thanks to Annette and a small group of activists, Woodland Pond is a mandatory stop on every campaign trail, where stump speeches give way to probing questions from an informed audience. Her photographs will last a very long time. Her activism will keep informing new generations. Her image is immortalized in a statue by her friend Trina. Her body continues for the purposes of educating medical students and to advancing the health of each and every one of us. There is so much to remember about Annette Finestone. For you, maybe it's something more personal, or maybe it's even more grand than the things that I talked about. In any case, I would ask you to join me, and this is the nap break, to take a moment here and silently join me and privately conjure up a memory of Annette, a thought, a conversation, a characteristic, or something else that you think should be part of her legacy. And I will offer you something that never exists when Annette and I were together, and that is a moment of silence to actually do that thinking. So no matter what chapter or anecdote came to mind, Annette's immortal mark is actually none of those things that I just said. It is her. It is herself. It was her way. Learned and smart, even at 102, she led most conversations with a question, still thirsting for more knowledge. Tough and sometimes acerbic in her assessments, Annette always demonstrated the humanity, a compassion, and a sense of true empathy for almost everyone. She could read a book with blind eyes. She could complete a mile lap around this place with a walker. And she was fun to be with. In the morning, many of you have heard before that I wake up and get ready for work, and right over my tie rack is a picture of Max and Annette, and I see that picture, and every single solitary day I pause and silently ponder something about this couple that I admire so much. It makes every day a good day. I invite you to start here today to share in that practice. Just open your mind and let in a thought inspired by this unique and remarkable woman. I'll close by asking us to retire that old cliche, only the good die young. Clearly, Annette proves that for our mortal selves, that is simply not true. As we in this room have some responsibility for keeping her spirit alive, let us prove instead that the message of Annette Finstone's eternal life is the good she's done, the good she's passed on, and the good she will always be. Surely miss her, and we will always remember her. Annette, we love you.
Okay, and now we open to everyone who would like to share. Yes. And if you'd like to stay in your seat, you can. If you want to come up to the podium, you can.
I've got something.
What you're comfortable with.
I've got something to read from Annette's homely sister. But to, put a point on what you said about Annette asking a question, every time I called Annette, she would say, "Who is this?" And I'd say, "It's Larry." And she'd say, "Larry who?" Every time. "It's your nephew Larry." "I know who it is." So, this, the first part of this is from me. And the second part is from my mom. But I have many memories about Annette and many stories. Most of them took place at Chate's. There's a photo we have that was taken in the old kitchen with Mom and Annette, with me sitting comfortably in the womb. I don't actually remember that, but that's the first photo of me. At Chate's, Annette was often my protector when my parents were not present. But the one memory I have in particular took place 4,000 miles away from Chate's. We lived in Florence, Italy for 6 months in 1964, and Annette came to visit. As a family, we took her all over the area, but one day, just the two of us, Annette and I, went to Bologna. And we spent the day together eating spaghetti bolognese, being tourists, and climbing the famous towers. Although I was probably the only one doing the tower climbing. I got a massive headache, probably from zipping up and down those towers. And on the train ride back to Florence, I sat next to Annette with my head on her shoulder, and her arm around me. Now, I spent a lot of time at Chait's in my life, but I can't remember another time in my 70 years where it was just Annette and me for such a wonderful time. I loved her and will always cherish that memory. Sorry. I'm really not good. You were great at public speaking. I am really good. So I asked Mom, who couldn't be here, she's really quite frail at this point, and I think physically and emotionally it would have been difficult. But I asked her, you know, would you like to say something? So she wrote something out. When I talk about my sister, it's always with great admiration and pride. She was the first woman to go to Japan after World War II ended, working for a government program. At home, she was an activist to the end. I last spoke to Annette just days before her death. Her voice was as strong and clear as usual. We said our goodbyes, knowing it was likely our final conversation. With much love, Annette, I say bon voyage.
I'm going to follow in Laura and Lisa's footsteps and offer a poem into the air and to all of us for Annette. Oh, I'm Ellen Goldsmith.
Cousin.
Cousin. This poem is by Liesel Mueller, In Passing. How swiftly the strained honey of afternoon light flows into darkness, and the closed bud shrugs off its special mystery in order to break into blossom, as if what exists so that it can be lost and become precious.
Well, my relationship, Judy Mage is my name. I don't live here, I live near here. But my relationship with Annette goes back a long way to the time when she was the person in our book club. It was called the Faculty Wives Book Club. And I guess I got into it 30 years ago or something. I was not a faculty wife, but became sort of the Faculty Widows Book Club, but there were other people. Anyway, every May at this time, that seems to, in my memory, the time that the book club would be held at Annette's. We held it in different people's houses and over in Accord. And she chose to host it in May, particularly because that's when the flowers were out at their best. And I just remember the house, the wonderful things on the walls, on the shelves. And I remember so much about how engaged she was in that book club. And I became pretty much the person toward the end who would order the books from the Talking Books library for her, because she, as everyone who knows her knows, her mind was pretty much intact right to the end. Her curiosity was intact, and even when she became too weak to come to the meetings, which was only maybe a year ago, not even that, we'd meet once a month and choose a book. But even then, she wanted to know what we were reading, and sometimes I would come and talk with her about it. But it was just, talk about role models, you know. And when I've said to people that Annette is my personal role model, and you know, us octogenarians need role models too. But I don't want to be blind, and they said you can't pick and choose when you have a role model. But in terms of her humor and her intellect, it was just wonderful. And the other memory that I have, very vivid memory, is her daughter Laura is one of our major members of the Minnewaska Distance Swimmers Association. And she told me, how many years ago, 10 years, 8 years, 6 years? It wasn't that long ago that your mom wanted to look at the cliffs again. And
3 or 4 years, there's a picture up there.
how many?
Maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, anyway. So it was early in the season, the mountain laurel was out, and Laura and I put her in my canoe. And she was able still to get down the little rocky hill to the canoe. And she sat in the middle of the canoe, and she wasn't totally blind. She could see from below, and she'd be looking up at the cliffs, and she'd never seen them from the water, from the edge. So, and a couple of years later, I did the same thing with Paul Lurie.
And Mom came too, remember?
Yeah. So, you know, her appreciation of that, her being lost in the beauty of it, was just so inspiring to me. And I'll never forget that moment when she was looking up at the cliffs and could see them from below. So, goodbye, Annette. A lot of love. Bye-bye.
Yes. Dorothy.
Can I get my cane from under there? Okay. Just under the seat. Just want to give this to you. This is that one. Yeah.